everyone remembers how it ended. The injuries, the chaos, the quarterback carousel, the endless arguments about whether the roster was cursed, unlucky, or simply ran out of time. What most people don't remember or don't want to admit is that none of it was random. The collapse didn't begin on the field, and it didn't begin with a bad season. It began in a quiet moment, in a draft room, with a decision that looked bold, visionary, even genius at the time. Before we go any further, if you care about real breakdowns like this, not highlight reel noise, not lazy takes, but actual cause and effect analysis, then subscribe to the channel. This is where we slow the game down, question the narratives everyone else repeats, and follow the consequences all the way to the end. Like the video if you value this level of depth, and comment with your take as we go, because this topic splits fans for a reason. With your support, this channel keeps doing long-form work most platforms avoid, and that's how we keep these conversations honest. A decision that was praised by analysts, defended by insiders, and justified for years after it clearly failed. That decision was the San Francisco 49ers trading 3 first-round picks to move up and select Trey Lance. Not because Trey Lance was a bad person, or because injuries are predictable, or because development is linear, but because that single move rewired the entire organization in ways that were invisible at first and irreversible later. Everything that followed, from roster erosion to quarterback instability to the quiet shrinking of the Super Bowl window, traces back to that moment. And once you see the chain reaction clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. To understand why this decision was so destructive, you have to remember where the 49ers were in early 2021. This was not a desperate franchise. This was not a rebuild. San Francisco had just been to a Super Bowl 2 seasons earlier. Kyle Shanahan was widely regarded as one of the sharpest offensive minds in football. John Lynch was praised for roster construction. The defense was elite when healthy. The run game was dominant. The system worked. What they did not have was quarterback stability, but they did have Jimmy Garoppolo, a quarterback who, for all his flaws, had already proven he could take this team deep into January. The situation called for refinement, not revolution. But instead of incrementally upgrading, the front office convinced itself that the roster was too good not to gamble. And that is where the logic cracked. The justification was simple and seductive. The roster was championship ready, but limited by a quarterback ceiling. If they could just land a high upside, elite traits quarterback, the dynasty would unlock. The problem wasn't that they wanted an upgrade. The problem was how they pursued it and what they were willing to sacrifice to chase theoretical upside. By trading 3 first-round picks to move up, the 49ers didn't just select Trey Lance. They made a binding organizational bet that altered timelines, incentives, patience, and tolerance for error. They removed flexibility. They removed margin. And most importantly, they removed their ability to admit they were wrong without catastrophic cost. At the time, the move was celebrated. Analysts praised the aggression. Fans applauded the ambition. "You have to take swings to win Super Bowls" became the mantra. What was ignored was the context of the player himself. Trey Lance was not a polished prospect. He was not a proven college superstar. He was a projection stacked on top of a projection. 1 full season as a starter, at an FCS school, against limited competition, with raw mechanics, limited reps, and an evaluation profile that screamed long-term project. That alone does not make the pick indefensible, but it does make the price reckless. You trade that much capital for certainty, not hope. And the moment that trade was finalized, the clock started ticking faster than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Here's the first consequence that most people dismiss: the loss of cheap, controllable talent. 3 first-round picks aren't just abstract assets. They are cost-controlled starters. They are rotational depth. They are injury insurance. They are leverage in future trades. When the 49ers gave those up, they didn't feel the pain immediately because the roster was already strong. But the NFL is a league of attrition. Contracts expire. Players get hurt. Depth erodes quietly. And when it does, you either reload through the draft or overpay in free agency. San Francisco chose the second path by necessity, not strategy. And that's how contenders slowly bleed out. The second consequence was more subtle but far more damaging: the distortion of quarterback development incentives. Once you invest that much in a player, you cannot treat them like a normal prospect. You can't sit them indefinitely. You can't bench them without questions. You can't move on without admitting failure. Trey Lance didn't just have to develop, he had to justify the trade. Every snap became symbolic. Every injury became a crisis. Every delay became a referendum on leadership. The organization boxed itself into a narrative it could not control. And when reality refused to cooperate, panic replaced patience. Meanwhile, Jimmy Garoppolo was left in purgatory. Too good to discard immediately. Too expensive to keep long-term. Too limited to fully commit to. The locker room felt it. Coaches felt it. Players noticed the contradiction between what was said publicly and what was happening privately. This wasn't a clean transition. It was a limbo state, and limbo kills momentum. Teams thrive on clarity. The 49ers chose ambiguity at the most important position in sports. Then came the injuries. And here's where lazy analysis takes over. People say, well, injuries ruined everything. That's not analysis, that's a dodge. Injuries are not the cause here. They are the stress test that exposed the fragility of the decision. When Trey Lance got hurt, the organization had no clean escape route. When Jimmy stepped back in, it wasn't stability, it was delay. Every week bought time but burned trust. The future was still unresolved, and the present was being held together with duct tape. This is where the point of no return appears. The moment Brock Purdy emerged. On the surface, it looked like salvation. The last pick of the draft saving the season. A feel-good story. A quarterback who executed the system efficiently. But beneath that miracle was an uncomfortable truth. The franchise had accidentally proven it never needed to make the Trey Lance trade in the first place. The system worked. The roster worked. The quarterback just needed to be competent, decisive, and accurate. And that realization detonated the original justification for the trade. Now, the organization was trapped between realities. Trey Lance represented sunk cost. Brock Purdy represented proof that the bet was unnecessary. Jimmy Garoppolo represented the past they had tried to escape. There was no path forward that didn't involve embarrassment, loss, or both. And this is where organizational damage becomes permanent. Because once leadership loses narrative control, everything becomes reactive. Look at the ripple effects. Draft capital was gone, forcing the team to patch holes instead of building sustainably. Cap space tightened as veterans were retained longer than ideal to keep the window open. Defensive depth thinned. Offensive line investments lagged. Injuries mounted not because of bad luck, but because depth had eroded. The margin for error shrank to zero. Every playoff run became a high-wire act. One injury, one bad bounce, one protection breakdown, and the season ended. And yet, the media narrative stayed soft. They're still contenders. They're just a quarterback away. They've been unlucky. But contenders don't live on miracles. Dynasties don't rely on seventh-round saviors. Sustainable organizations don't sacrifice 3 first-round picks for a player who needs years to develop while their roster is peaking now. The disconnect between perception and reality grew wider each year. The most damaging consequence, though, wasn't tactical, it was cultural. Once an organization convinces itself that it can outsmart structural reality, it starts repeating the mistake in smaller ways. Overconfidence creeps in. Risk tolerance increases. Accountability blurs. The belief that we're smarter than the system becomes ingrained. And eventually, the system wins. Who benefited from this decision? Ironically, almost everyone except the 49ers. Draft-rich teams rebuilt faster. Quarterback-needy franchises learned cautionary lessons without paying the price. Analysts gained content. Fans gained arguments. And the league watched another example of how chasing ceiling at the wrong time collapses windows faster than conservative play ever could. What makes this decision especially dangerous is that it's still misunderstood. People debate Trey Lance's talent instead of the trade itself. They argue about injuries instead of incentives. They focus on individual outcomes instead of organizational math. This wasn't about one player failing. It was about a franchise abandoning discipline at the exact moment discipline was required most. And here's the final uncomfortable truth. Even if Trey Lance had developed into a good quarterback, the trade would still have been reckless given the roster's timeline. Because when your team is ready to win now, you don't mortgage the future for a project. You exploit the window. You maximize certainty. You reduce variance. The 49ers did the opposite. They increased variance when stability was the optimal path. And in a league defined by thin margins, that mistake compounds faster than talent can save it. So when people ask why the window feels like it quietly closed, why the dominance never fully materialized, why every season feels like it ends one injury short, it's not mysterious. It's not cursed. It's not unfair. It's the delayed consequence of a single decision that rewired everything downstream. A decision that was applauded, defended, and rationalized until the cost became undeniable. This is how contenders collapse in the modern NFL. Not with explosions, not with scandals, but with one bold move that trades certainty for hope and then demands reality bend to justify it.